the reason that I was asked to do this, or invited to, was because for 10 years, I had a canoeing and kayaking guide service on the river. So I was involved a lot with it, not only out on the river, but with helping other people plan. So I was involved with maps and distances and sharing with them different things that I learned, and I was constantly learning stuff during that time. People were sharing with me. So it's I've gathered a whole lot of stuff. And prior to that, I had been, as a young person, shortly after I got married, my wife and I spent a lot of time on the creeks because she enjoyed the outdoors, and I did too, and had the opportunity to some degree live out some dreams that I had as a kid, listening to other people talk about it. I had schoolmates that had grown up in different areas who their dad took them hunting, fishing, and all, and my dad's generation, I listened to them talk. And it was an interesting time in the 60s. A lot of people were just getting kind of on their feet in the 50s after World War II, and they were getting them their first boat, and I was had the opportunity to listen to them talk about it. So during that period of time, I had an opportunity to experience myself some of the things that I heard about. One thing that made a lot of that possible, there was an organization formed about 25 years ago called Roanoke River Partners. And we could spend an afternoon talking about that, but what happened was they wound up, a group of people got together and decided to build a camping platform out in the swamp. And we'll talk about that a little later. But they came up with some of these maps. I'm going to refer to this map a lot, and then we're going to go really quick. My understanding is that afterwards we got maybe a little time if maybe to go back and revisit some of the stuff and talk further before we have to leave the room. This map is the map that Roanoke River Partners put together of what they refer to as the lower Roanoke River, and we're talking about, here we are in Williamston, and you'll see it goes a little bit west up here to over to Berkeley County, and I'm gonna start it there and then come back. And there's where it empties into the Albemarle Sound. And we're gonna, and one thing I'll go ahead and say, you see these areas, these white areas here, at one time, the Roanoke River here in Williamston was about 3 miles wide. And some of these places, they estimated as much as 5 miles wide. And what's happened is, over the hundreds of thousands of years is filled in, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. But what we have now is our river is basically just a little channel that's snaking back and forth through what once was a big river, very similar to the Chowan River. Number one, that's the Albemarle Sound, largest freshwater sound, at least on the East Coast, and maybe in the country. Wasn't always a freshwater sound. At one time, it had an inlet in it, Roanoke Inlet. Salt water came in and out, and believe it or not, it was navigable right up to the Civil War, and it would fill up, and then it would come back open, and eventually it was completely filled up. My technical person here, I'll point to you and we'll go on to the next one.
Oh, okay.
But we're going to come back to this map a lot. Again, we'll have a little spot. Where the river flows into the Albemarle Sound, at one time there was a lighthouse that sat there. And matter of fact, it was a light boat at first, my understanding was, and there were maybe more than one. But eventually it was no longer used, and unfortunately, a contractor that was from over in Chowan County either put a bid on it or traded it off for moving it. He got his hands on it. That company is still in business. You might even have heard of it. It's called WAFF, W-A-F-F, Mr. WAFF. Go on to the next picture. That shows what it was like. He took the lighthouse down, brought it over to Edenton, and it actually sat on the barge over there for years, and it was a residence. People lived in it. And not that many years ago, maybe, I'll say 15 years ago, there began to be an interest in trying to restore it and whatnot. And it was still in the Waugh family, and they were able to work the thing out, and eventually, I'm assuming the town of Edenton, might have been Chowan County, got their hands on it and turned it into what you saw before. It's there on the waterfront now in Edenton. You can drive right down there and look at it. But that was the original one that came back. What on earth did you just do?
I don't know, you just can't get good help anymore. You just can't get good help anymore. See, one thing, when you hit that wrong button, it goes haywire.
What happened is, the thing would be your, most of mine does it when I touch that. So you might want to do them one at a time. That's the mouse. You hit that mouse. So that's the old one. We saw the new one. All right.
Oh, okay.
On to the next one.
Okay.
So you,
Everybody, a moment of silence.
There we go. All right, and we're the wrong way. Go again.
Okay.
Go again. Here we go. All right, here we go. Go back to that map. Go back one more to that map again. We're going to talk about something. When you come in from the Sound, right around the curve over here is Edenton. You can see go out not too far. You can see the Edenton Bridge. And we'll talk another time about the Cashel River because that's equally as interesting. But this creek right here is called Conaby Creek, and it's one of the most beautiful creeks, I think, on the river. But the interesting thing about that is something happened during I call it the Uncivil War, that they refer to as Cushion's Escape. This creek flows all the way back in right to the city limits of Plymouth. All right, go to the next picture. Y'all familiar with the CSS Albemarle, the ironclad that was built up near Scotland Neck? And ironically, the story goes that the guy that actually was the engineer on it had a last name of Elliott. We have Elliots that lived here on Halifax Street that were Elliots from that same area, and we were suspicious that this guy might have been related to them. But that was the fear of the Union Navy, because if that ironclad made it out to the Sound, they were going to be able to block those naval Union vessels from coming in. So, and they did. They made it down, and there was a story I'll get to a little bit later, but it was docked there in Plymouth one night, and this guy named William Cushing, go to the next, this is obviously a picture. We could spend the afternoon talking about this Cushing guy, and he grew up in a little town in upper New York, referred to as Fredonia, Fredonia. And he wound up, long story about him, but he got permission and got commission, whatnot, to bring a boat down from somewhere north, probably to Chesapeake Bay, and he brought it in to the Albemarle Sound, brought it up the river in dark, and they referred to him as a torpedo, but basically it was a long pole that went out in front of a boat with a charge on it. And if you can go back to that other picture that we saw just before him. He was injured during that time. What happened was, the charge was so big on that, what they referred to as a torpedo. Some of the stuff of the iron armament came back, killed some of the guys on the boat with him, injured him. He was able to get in the water and get away from the people that were obviously after him. and he made it back to the Conaby Creek and stole a small boat and made it back out to the Sound and escaped. And a few years ago, in Plymouth, we had a paddle down there, and they referred to it as the Cushion's Escape, and we had probably 50 people showed up, and we paddled all the way out the creek there as to where that actually happened. A fascinating thing about that story to me is this, and I'm going to tell you about him a little later on. There was a gentleman that actually family owns now, Fort Branch. Have all of you heard about Fort Branch?
Mm-hmm.
Henry Winslow. A few years ago, I learned that Henry Winslow's daughter lives in that same town that Cushing grew up in. It's an adjoining town. It's like 15 miles away from them. Mary, was Mary close to your age?
She was my age.
Your age, Mary Winslow. But anyway, she didn't know it, and it just was a fluke that it happened. So that was the real interesting story about the Conaby Creek. Okay, let's move on to the next one. All right, we'll go back to him. And he and ironically, he wound up dying very young. And write down these people's names because you can Google them and learn a lot. If you got a pencil and paper, write down William Cushing. All right, the next one, we're coming down to all right, go back the other way. You'll go back. Well, no, that was actually Plymouth was next. That is a replica of the same lighthouse that we just saw. Edenton has the original. Plymouth coming up the river from Conaby Creek. Plymouth has their replica there. You can drive right down on their Water Street and see it. Edenton has the original. Plymouth said, we'll show you, we'll build a replica. Needless to say, they were sad because they didn't get the other one, because it actually set at the mouth of Roanoke, which was closer to Plymouth than it was to Edenton. All right? We're going back to a map again, I think.
Okay.
No, we're actually, yeah, here we go. All right, so we've made our way up here to the town of Plymouth. And there's the Weyerhaeuser plant right there with all their ponds. If you come around a couple of miles up, there's a little wiggle connection that connects over to the Cushai River. And to my knowledge, it's always been called the thoroughfare. And it connects those rivers. Paddlers can make their way from the Roanoke River over into the Cushai River. And it's deep. Motorboats obviously can go through it. There was a vicious Civil War naval battle was fought there, as it was a little further up. When you pass by the thoroughfare, a couple of miles up, there's what's called Broad Creek, and that's has always been, in my lifetime, a popular fishing place. Now it's a good travel down there. It's about 6.5 or 7 miles or more up from Janesville. So the weak of heart wouldn't go up there, but people that were willing to travel that far in a small boat would. Interesting thing about Broad Creek, and by the way, at Broad Creek there were, in an attempt to keep that ironclad from coming down, several barges were chained together across the river there, and in an attempt to try it, but because the water happened to be extremely high or extremely low, one or the other during that time, the ironclad was able to get over them, and they didn't stop it there, and it wound up making its way down after it was built. Interesting, 3 different platforms on this Roanoke Broad, we call it. Go to the next picture.
This is not gonna happen the next time,
There
I
you go,
promise
there
you
you go.
that.
No, very good. All right, platforms. When you were driving a boat, paddling along or whatnot, this would be the first thing that you see when you arrived at one of those platforms. So as you can see, it's primitive camping. And there's a little privy area on a platform similar to that, like a deck behind, attached to a house, a little privy area there for a toilet, but you bring your own toilet system with you when you come. All right. By the way, I got to put this in. This little wooden boat that I have. Y'all familiar with Gardner's Creek? There was a boat builder there named Asa Robertson. Built any number of boats designed like this, and back when people were building their own boats or getting somebody to build one. And this was the last boat that Asa built. He's passed away now. But we're going to the next picture and you'll see. So that was kind of that's what you actually find. And then during the early spring, after the leaves are there, sometimes nobody's been camping there, but we all have a broom on each one of those platforms. You can sweep the leaves off. Since these pictures have been taken, they've all been it's been reconditioned and pressure washed and whatnot, so they look better than that now. But that's what people, that's what they like. They've come as 1,000 or more per year. The most that came in 1 year before COVID was about 1,400 came 1 year. Okay. We'll go back to the map again in a minute. But when you leave, you can put it back to the map. There we go. When you leave this broad creek and paddle back out, there's a stretch there about 6.5 miles that's got some interesting things on it. And one of them sitting right along in here, and give you some idea where you're at. There's Hardison's Barbecues right there. There's the town of Jamesville. The river makes a turn back to the left. Hardison's Barbecue is right there. That road called the Gray Farm Road runs pretty much in that area, comes back over, joins back 64. All right, move on to that, to go back to that steam engine. It sits on that other side right there. One of the most fascinating things to me on the riverbank, that engine right there was left there sometime in the late 1800s, and there was a fishery on that side of the river. The Nature Conservancy owns that land now, and there was some talk about it one time. We were going to try to get it out and put it in a museum there in Jamesville, maybe the old fire station. But it was finally determined that it would take so much to get it out, and it probably would be a lot of damage done to it. It was this, plus the Nature Conservancy. When you get involved with them, that's a great organization. But when you start talking about doing anything on that land, first they got to do a conservation study on it. It can take 5 years and whatnot. Anyway, it didn't work. We thought we were going to be. Matter of fact, that WAF company that I mentioned, they were going to help with it. But that is what was left. That steam engine was used probably to winch, the some of the big nets in that they would have had there. And there's actually a little smaller engine there, but that's fascinating. You can walk up to that. Now, go back to that map one more time. Go back in the other way. Right there. All right, the steam engine sits right along there. There's a fascinating area across the river from that steam engine called Daly's Hill. There's a graveyard there, and it's pretty certain that Mr. Jasper Hardison lived there. His home site is there, and he is the patriarch of every Hardison that there is down there in Jamesville and Weaveston, and there you
There's
go.
a Hardison around
Hardison all over the place. Is right there at Daly's Hill. Another interesting thing about that area is this: at one time, and there was a houseboat that would be tied across that river, and I call them the dignitaries. Some of the big businessmen here in Weaveston would go down and hunt and play cards and cook and eat. The houseboat was across the river, and they would drive down this little path to the little landing area. And by the way, the banks are steep down there. The bank could easily be 20 or 30 feet up above the water. But there would be a little gully that had been wiggled out down in a place where you could put a boat in. They would pull up over there and blow the horn, And there was a man that was the head cook and took care of the thing. It was a black man, I believe his name was Ollie. But he would paddle the boat or take a little engine, whatever it was. He'd come across, they'd leave their cars over on this side. He'd take them back across for a card game or whatnot for the night. There's still kids, all the people from that time are all gone, but there's at least two sets of kids here that remember their dads taking them there. Walter Miller and Johnny Miller. Vicky Barnhill, that was our age, she remembers it, and Vicky has a first cousin that they remember their dad. Barnhill had tire company, Barnhill, it was a B&W tire. But I heard about that all when I was a kid and hear the old people talk about going down to the cabin, and I finally got a chance to go there. But then later I learned that my mother was a Hardison, and learned that property is on Daly's Hill. The reason Daly's involved, he married one of the Hardison girls, so he owned that little piece of property, called it Daly's Hill, and it was on that Gray Farm Road on the Jasper Hardison plantation. And we're going to that, hopefully, and it's almost here, hopefully before the mosquitoes get out, we're gonna get a group together. There's a guy down there by the name of Jimmy Hardison. He knows, Jimmy's got a lot of information on it, and his story, and he's going to take me and some other people down there. Whoever wants to go, we're going to go down there and see where that old Jasper Hardison plantation was. All right, here we are. We've already come by the Daly's Hill and the old houseboat. By the way, the houseboat eventually burned, but later there's a cabin built there, and I thought I had a picture of it, but I couldn't find it. There's actually a cabin. I've gone down and spent the night in it a time or two on the opposite side of the river. You get to it by boat. Jamesville Hunting Club owns it. All right, go back here.
We'll go past.
You keep going north.
Okay.
Yep. We're gonna go back. We keep going. There we go. Now, coming through the town of Jamesville, you saw it on the map. I happened to be coming by there one day, and it would have been probably about this time of year because the Cypress Grill unfortunately burned. There was people gathered up there getting ready to wait and get them some fried herrings. Somebody would have already caught some herrings by now. Usually start keeping. So I took that picture, and there's another one actually shows one. None of these people, I can't recognize them. There's no telling where they came from. Rocky Mount, Tarboro, Elizabeth City. They would come down and eat those fried, fresh herrings. A lot of them once a year, but it was just sort of a tradition. Unfortunately, that building burned and couldn't be built back. All right, now, moving along, I think we got a map next. Here we go. All right, we're past Jamesville now, and we've made a couple of curves. You see this little wiggle that goes off to the left there? How many of you have ever heard of Devil's Gut? Devil's Gut. Here's what Devil's Gut does. You see the river makes a big turn and goes northeast. Devil's Gut, sometime in the past 100,000 years, a little waterway was washed through there, and that's a shortcut. And it's one of the most fascinating places on the river. The land is because it's through a swamp, the bank is very close to the water level, so you can sit in your canoe, your kayak, and look right down and see the beavers and the otter and the muskrats and the birds and whatnot. So that's what all the paddlers that we put in, that was what everybody wanted to do, unless they'd done it before, of course. They'd put it in Weebston, come down the river a couple of miles, come in Devil's Gut, and it's an 11-mile paddle through there, but they would wind up spending the night on one of these platforms that looked very similar to the ones that we had. Y'all familiar with Gardner's Creek, where you go across Gardner's Creek when you're going down to Jamesville? That's where the old landing was there. Unfortunately, private property, we can't use it anymore, but for maybe 150 years, it was a fantastic asset. Go forward.
Can't get.
There we go. I'm sorry. There's your next right. All right. When you go up Devil's Gut, there's two big waterways up there. This one is called, they call them dead waters. Probably who knows how long. And the reason being, they go up in the swamp. They don't connect to the river. Devil's Gut because the water comes in the gut upstream, that the water's always moving in the gut, unless it's extremely low, but it's just 99% of the time the water's moving. These dead waters, the water has a rule doesn't move unless we've had a real high water situation. Water's black, pretty beautiful cypress trees in there, and I've taken a lot of pictures, and some of them have actually been painted. And go a little further up Devil's Gut. Interesting thing about the gut, which the old maps refer to it as Bull Run Island, and the timber was cut back in there in the 1800s. What are we doing for time? Where are we?
You're over a little bit.
What are we right now?
5 after 1.
Well, we're getting close. I'm saying 3 o'clock, you'll all be out of here. But anyway, the timber was cut with the use of narrow gauge rail, which was a smaller size rail, and it was narrower than your regular trains would be. But they put that rail down in the swamp to bring those trees out. And the things that they were looking for in that low bottom land was ball cypress, of course, and Atlantic white cedar. Those were being used for building boats and shingles. And they went in there was trees in there. We'll look at some in a minute. But it was not unusual at all for them to be over half the width of this, one of these tables, at the length of one of these tables. But some of this stuff was left in there, steam boilers that were used to power equipment. There are some on Devil's Gut. That's worth the trip up there. There's also an artesian well within sight of that, where one of the old fishing camps, who knows how many years ago, stuck a pipe down in the ground, and miraculously, there's enough water pressure down there, pushed the water. You've heard of overflow before. Water runs out of that pipe year round. Fascinating. All right, we're getting ready to get to the cypress tree, and this is one of my favorite pictures. That's an old boat that I used to bring people up when we went in on different tours and stuff. And this limb right here was I used a GPS to find it as well, but that's where I would tie up to be able to know where I'd get out and use my compass setting to go in. So this was, I had a couple that he was a photographer and she was as well on this one. So there were 3 huge cypresses that somehow got left in there during some of the periods of time that the timber was being cut. And these 3 were so much larger than any of the rest of them. It's still a mystery as to exactly how they survived. Go to the next one. You make it see how big it is a little better. There's a regular paddle, a long paddle that's sitting beside it. The larger one, and I don't know how much larger it was. I went to that larger one with a Boy Scout troop when I was 16, and we went in there. It was about 10 or 12 of us, and I don't think a single picture was taken. But there's another interesting story about that. But there's one that's within 150 or 200 yards of that one that is about the same size. So there's 2 left. Now, you notice we're standing in water there like that. Like you can see him with his boots on. He was a professional photographer. But normally the water, like with water we've had right now, the water would be almost up to your pockets around that tree. How it survives, I don't know. But the third one, lightning struck it and it burned. I'm going to go back in there, hopefully, at some point in time, because I want to take a picture. They say, the people that have been there to it say there's still enough of the stump there that you can tell how big it was. I've taken a number of people in there. A lot of people have heard of it, but in the county, I'll bet you there isn't 25 people in Martin County that's ever been to it. Heard about him. You ever heard the name T.W. Blunt? A lot of people, T.W. took, I'm almost certain it was him, took our Boy Scout troop in there, but he was, that was his thing. Ironically, you see how big those trees were, this would have been in 1968 or 9. The timber had been cut in there up close to them, because I remember well, as a teenager when we walked in there, I remember that we were stepping over places where the trees had been cut and tops had been left. So that's one of the large cypresses. if we went back, we'll go back to the map in a minute, but when you go up from those cypresses, that's what's called a Charlton Jordan house, and it's located on Bertie County. By the way, the entire river is claimed by Bertie County. That's another story. But we were at risk, and I'm teasing a little bit, but those people over there are very territorial. They don't want anybody else on their land, and it's kind of sad in a way. Mr. Jordan is a cemetery there. He and his wife are buried there. That is thought to be the second oldest brick residence house in North Carolina. The oldest one they think is the White New Bowl White is it White New Bowl or New Bowl White? New Bowl White, and that's in Hertford. But there's thought that this is the second one, and it sits. You have to get out of your boat and slip through the woods and duck bullets or whatnot. But anyway, that's it, and that's a real treat. I tried to work that out so I could have permission to take people in there, but that didn't work out. All right, take us on down the river, Mr. Peel.
Here we go.
All right. Coming down the river a little bit, there's a creek that comes into it. That's another cut through, just like Devil's Gut, called Conine. And this is one of the few covered platforms that's on the river. You can at least get in out of the rain and whatnot if you happen to have bad weather or whatnot. But it's about 4 miles down from the landing, maybe a little bit further than that. Go to the next one. I just wanted to put these people in. That was one of the most delightful couples that I met with and took on a tour. And the funny thing about it was, she's got on my jacket, my windbreaker. I loaned her that because I didn't show up with enough clothes. When you're in April and even early May or whatnot, you can have a change in weather. Unfortunately, he's gone. He was a lawyer in Chapel Hill, and they were just delightful. But I took them. We spent a day out and stopped and took a picture there and rested a little while, brought us some chairs and rested a little while. He wrote a poem for another time. I met him on one of the earlier group paddles, and he wrote a poem, and I had it on the front page of my website for a long time. Mr. Toms, T-O-M-S. Now, go back just a little bit on that. Let's see what it takes. Go back one part right there. Right across, almost across from where that White New Bowl, Charlton Jordan house is, there's some, I call it the ghost train. There's some train cars that were left in there. These don't go back to the 1800s. This is actually a gasoline engine on this, but when they had timbered everything out and had some of this equipment left, they just left it in there. But it's a fascinating thing, the big train cars and stuff that are sitting in the big wheels. That were left there. There was something else about the train that slipped my mind. But anyway, that actually would be somewhere right along here, because that's what the Conine Creek. When you go across toward Windsor, the Riverfield, you cross the creek. Next time you'll know, there's the highway right there, 17. There's where the bridge is, and you cross that Conine Creek, and it goes about 2.5 miles and comes right back out at that platform. The other thing that I was going to mention, wrapping it up real quick, when you pass Williamston, the next interesting thing that you'll come to is what's called Conohoe Farm and Conohoe Creek. Tuscarora Indian history there. A little further up the river, there was a Tuscarora reservation up there at one time, and there were, I believe it was 32,000 acres that were, that after the Tuscarora War of 1711, I believe it was, some of the Indians were forced to be on the reservation for a while. And that was up in what we call the Indian Woods, which are the roads to the left. But anyway, just after you pass Conine Creek, maybe a couple of miles up, was what was called Speller's Ferry. Our river bridge that we have here opened in 1923. Prior to that time, every car that came from Bertie County or that area had to come across the ferry, and the ferry road is that path that you see to the left. When you drive into Martock Park, you see it off to the left where people drive down that fence. That was the road. And you can walk back in there to what's called Conahoe Farm, and there's still the remnants of a bridge, remains of a concrete bridge that was built in there at some point in time. And that's where the people had to travel. And it was about 8 miles up there, probably. It was 6 or 8. But they all had to go into that Stellar's Ferry, come down that side of that river, and come right through Martock Park into a little area called Skewarkey, which later became Williamston. One last one. This gentleman right here was Mr. Henry Winslow. His family owned it still does, own the Fort Branch property. And this is probably probably the last picture taken of him before he passed away. I had this Boy Scout troop came from Chapel Hill, I believe they were. And he was delightful. He knew a lot about the history, and he actually walked with us that day and showed the fellows around. And here's one of the cannons that was recovered out of the river back in the early 70s. We could talk the rest of the day about that. These are just some of the little big points of interest, I think. But from there we can go all the way to Weldon, and every curve has its story. Whatnot. Anybody got any question?
That brick house that you're talking about, that's accessible by land. You know where that is, where that pecan
Yes.
grove is?
Yeah,
You can drive that. I think it's on Gillum property now.
it
Because
is.
Miss Gillum, who has now passed away, but she was telling me about that one time, and I've seen it.
The other end of the farm, they call it the Davenport Farm.
Davenport. Oh,
Davenport
yeah.
goes right there, and look, it comes out, that road comes out right there, Pecan Grove.
Yes,
Yep,
it
yep,
does.
yep.
Yeah, that house right there. And
Right.
I've seen that.
That is fascinating. One time, some of the descendants within the last 20 years actually lived in it and went in
Yeah,
and
they
made a
did.
bunch of changes and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it's a real jewel. I wish it could be fixed so that we could go in. But got deer hunters and whatnot, and again, but we slipped through the woods and got that picture one day and didn't get shot.
Miss Gillum's daughter lived in that house for a while.
What's the guy's name that she's married to?
Ivy.
Ivy.
His last name's Ivy.
Yeah.
Tim
Tim Ivy.
Tim
He's the one
Ivy.
I talked to and tried to get permission.
And they wouldn't let you?
Absolutely not. And the irony of it was he was working for a department in the state that was encouraging touristry.
Oh my gosh.
That's another story.
Heber, are you still doing your river canoe and kayaking guide service?
No, a couple of years ago, it seemed to be the time to stop, and I hated having to, but there were a lot of things. You know, when you come into, you're applying for a loan, let's say at the bank, and they give you a point system, and they say, all right, you get a plus points for this and a negative. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, there were so many negatives that were on the sheet that it just looked like it was time to get out. It's physical. I had to load the boats by myself and unload them, 70 pounds each, and that was part of it. But and there was other things going on in my life. Highway 17, taking property that I had to look after, and grandchildren and all that, and the liability aspect got to the point where it just was time for me to stop. I still want to do. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to do some guides where I can put people in a boat and go back up there, because like that older couple that you saw, in a half a day you can get all of it that you want and get a real good idea of what the lower Roanoke is like. A person could easily do 3 days of it and still not get much north of here. I did one. You know, you do these things, you go to the Smithsonian, you're so impressed, you say, I'm coming back here every year, I got to do it. It was my birthday weekend, and I took a 14-foot boat with a little 9.9 horsepower motor on it one day, and I put it in the landing here at Williamston, and I went to Weldon, which was 70 miles. And it sounds like a big deal, it really wasn't, and I said I was going to, I took probably 200 pictures, but, it was a fascinating trip. I would love to be able to get on a larger boat and do a day trip up there sometime with the group. Who knows whether that'll ever happen or not, but there's plenty to be seen and enjoyed. You gotta pick the right time, because the river's got I used to tell people it's got 2 or 3 different faces. During the spring, it can be one of the most beautiful, tranquil places, and then other times, like maybe even right now, it can be a place that you need to stay away from. And one of the problems we're dealing with paddles, when people plan their trip, they only got 2 weeks a year and they planned it and got everything set up. It's really hard to talk them out of it when the water's at flood stage and you don't want them to go. Most of them took the advice and didn't, but anyway, it can be a great place to be, and there's a lot of horror stories can be told about it too. That's how I got the name Place of Death, Roanoke. Mora, T-O-C, place, Mora, death.
When you were little, did your parents tell you not to go swimming in that river?
They told everybody not to even walk near it.
Yes, they did. I was wondering how many people got that same story when we were young. It's like,
Well, here's
you
the
don't go
thing.
swimming in that river, you don't go near
When
it.
this Roanoke River Partners got started and people started talking about putting canoes in the water, the locals, and still
I
are,
know.
the locals were horrified at it.
Horrified.
And they said, my gosh, man, so those whirlpools will swallow you in your canoe and whatnot. You don't need to be on it when the water's real high, simply because it's hard to get out and if something would happen. But it can be times. The most dangerous thing on that Roanoke River is another human being in a bass boat or a fast boat. For some of them, it's just like riding on the road. Majority of people can act, and a lot of the guys on the boats were very, very courteous, and of the other paddlers, and some didn't. But all that's got to be taken into consideration when you. We got a lady here went paddling on the Roanoke River was it Christmas weekend? Wasn't it Christmas? It was between Christmas and New Year's, wasn't it?
It was New Year's Eve.
Yeah, they had a paddling event down there. I'll let her tell you sometime later if she wants to. The bottom line is things can happen, and if you're in a swimming pool, things can happen. You can get to the top of the water or whatever, the sun shining and all that. The Roanoke River, you got dark water, you got current and whatnot. So it can be a treacherous place, but it also can be one of the most relaxing if the timing's right and everything else.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Great.
Leave the map on.